Hello, AJ and Ed and Eric and Megan. Victoria, welcome. Ajanique, welcome. We're going to get started. I think people will probably start trickling in, but we're going to get started right now. And I just want to welcome you. We're excited to gather our alumni participants and all of you and our faculty and staff participants to learn more about how seminary prepares those who are called to or interested in more unconventional types of ministry or ministry settings that might not necessarily occur within a church building or take place in other settings outside of a church proper. So we have some guest panelists who are alumni of Western Theological Seminary. We have 3 of them: Kristen Uroda, Torres, and Jenn Ryden. And they all graduated from Western within the last 5 years with either an M.Div or an M.A. And I think all tried on church ministry as part of their internships or as part of their post-seminary work, and have landed in spaces that are ministry, to be sure, and even in Luis's case involve church, but also involve really unique ways of going about church. So those are some of the things that we want to talk about as far as why and how would somebody attend seminary if they aren't thinking about being a traditional preaching pastor in the church on the corner. So we have Kristen Uroda. I'll introduce the people in the room. Kristen Uroda is, she graduated with an M.Div, and she works as a design researcher for a nonprofit design firm in Detroit. Torres has, he's lead pastor at a church in Lansing that he and a group of folks started from scratch after living in the community for a while and seeing what was needed. Jenn Ryden is the chaplain of discipleship at Hope College, working for the campus ministry program there. And all 3 of them have great insights for us. Faculty and staff from Western include Keith Reynolds, who's our associate director of admissions, me, Jill English, the director of admissions. We have Dr. Ben Connor, who is, I write these down because I get titles wrong sometimes. He's our professor of practical theology, and he's the director of the Center for Disability and Ministry at Western. Shari Oosting, who is our associate director of formation, and Kyle Small, who is our professor of church leadership and was the dean of formation at Western for a number of years. Each person here has significant experience in discerning sense of ministry call, having gone to seminary and worked in churches maybe in some capacity, but have landed in some other space. So you have a really experienced and wise group of people in front of you to answer some of the questions that you might have about how to think about seminary in the context of unconventional or non-traditional or ministry outside the traditional setting. So I'm gonna get started right away. And we'll start with our alumni. Keith is going to be asking some of the questions. And as we move through this time, we're going to start with asking alumni some questions. We're going to then move on to asking our faculty and staff questions. And as you are thinking about what you would like to know more about, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat to post your questions. They're only going to be visible to the people that you see on the screen. And then when we get to the 3rd segment, which is about 20 minutes or so at the end of our time together, we'll post some of those questions, and all of our panelists will weigh in on their perspective on answers for what you might be wondering about. So if you have any questions about the format, then just type that in and we'll try to get that one in too. But Keith, you want to get started with asking our alumni some of the questions that we were wondering about? You're muted, Keith.
That'd be helpful. All right. I'm going to begin with Pastor Luis Torres. Pastor is Pastor Luis is planning a church, leading a church there in the Lansing area. And so tell us a little bit, Luis, about how this kind of evolved. You know, you're no strangers to the world of church ministry. You grew up in a church, but you've always had a bent towards the hood and towards diversity and justice stuff. And so tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing.
So yeah, thanks, Keith, for that. So after seminary, well, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. But one of the reasons why I went to seminary in the first place because I had received calling. I knew inside of my heart that that I wanted to reach people for Jesus. This was something that I had deeply ingrained. My pastor had deeply ingrained in me, and I just felt like, you know, calling was the driving force for why I went to seminary. I never really intended. I was never the greatest student in the entire world, right? I never intended to actually further my education when it came to theology. But because of my calling, because I felt like God was calling me to be able to reach people for Jesus in whatever context it was, that's why I decided to go into seminary. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the ministry that we're doing here in Lansing, it's very different, right? I'm bivocational, so you know, we planted the church, and the reason why we planted the church is because we wanted to see heaven now. We didn't want to see heaven later. We wanted to see a church that was unified but that was multi-ethnic, and that was just very challenging because our natural bent is to segregate. Our natural bent is to be able to go with the people that think like us, who worship like us, who and so it was a huge challenge to even get something like that started off the ground. So, you know, when we started, we did an emphasis on the table. We did an emphasis on relationships in the home. So it wasn't, you know, building. We still don't have a building, right? You know, we're not centrally located in a building, even though we do meet. Post-COVID, we met somewhere on Sundays, but it was mostly focused more on the table and empowering people to be the light of Jesus, you know, in their context, and to be able to be stretched in their homes and in their tables.
Yeah, yeah. And in what ways, and I know you can say a whole lot more, Luis, speak to the ways in which Western prepared you for this endeavor, and how is it that your time at Western, and you're attending now through the D.Min program, how is it preparing you, equipping you to be able to do the multicultural mission and ministry that you're engaging in?
Yeah, so Western has been just a huge help. One, to be able to shape my theology. I think that's a big thing, because before seminary, there was a lot of things. I mean, I was still preaching, and I was still, you know, I was in ministry already when I went to Western. But you know, there was a lot of things that I didn't even know about. You get what I'm saying? Like a deeper study of the Old Testament. You know, Tom Bogart's not a professor there anymore, but Tom Bogart was pivotal for the formation of my ministry. Just a specific, you know, he loved prophets, and we got into a deep study of who the prophets were and what prophetic ministry actually meant. I had a skewed view of prophetic ministry until I had, you know, this encounter at Western and built a personal relationship at Western. That's what I like about Western, is that the student to faculty ratio is, you know, the faculty is very approachable, you know, and you become friends with the faculty. I mean, I'm looking at some of you, and I'm good friends with some of the faculty that's on here right now, you know. So I think that was just the formation, being able to shape my theology, and, you know, be able to take the classes that's what I liked about the MA program, because I had the MA. The MA program gave me a little bit more flexibility on the classes that I actually wanted, and you know, to be able to learn what I wanted to learn. I think that the MA provided that space for me to be able to learn the things that I actually wanted to learn. And so, yeah, and I think the personal relationship that we were able to have with the professors and have a deep study on these things is just, to me, it's crucial.
Yeah. Speaking of the personal relationship and how the rapport is built, I remember being at your church launch the opening Sunday, and Dr. Bogart was there.
Yeah, Tom Bogart was there. Yeah,
Tom, he was there. Yeah, that's awesome. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Kristen, you're up. Kristen is one of the brightest, most creative individuals that I know. Brilliant mind, and really creates artistic renderings that are sophisticated and colorful and all of that. She has such a heart for racial justice. Spent some time out in New Mexico, correct? Shortly after graduating, and is now doing some incredible work. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so I work as a design researcher at my organization is called Sevilla. And our mission is basically like to create a civil society for all by focusing on our public serving institutions and helping them to become more human-centered. So like a lot of the work that we do, we work with government, we work with policymakers, we work with advocates and community organizations to kind of poke at some of these systemic things in our society that cause more harm than good, unravel them, and implement like a better system that helps the people that are using them. One of our biggest work is working with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to make the public benefit application process more human-centered and easier to access for those that are using it. So we redesigned pretty much like the application, the way that people interact with caseworkers. And a lot of the feedback that we got through that project was like, I feel like a human. Like, I feel like I have my dignity back. Like, I don't want to be on food stamps. I don't want to be on Medicaid. Like, I'm in a hard place in my life. But because of like this work that we did to unravel the application, which was like a huge 63-page barrier for everyone applying for it, people feel like, you know, I'm a human again, and I can go on with my life and like focus on other things instead of, oh God, I have this like 63 piece of paper that asks me stupid questions like, when was my child conceived? And, you know, just, you know, try and live my life. So yeah, that's kind of like it a little bit.
That's it. That's it. And as you reflect on your Western experience, what are some ways that you feel Western uniquely prepared you for the work that you're doing in this season?
Yeah. So I'd say like I've always had this kind of interest in like pioneering new things and being in like new areas of like fields and studies. And like I also have this like real desire to get at like the root and the heart of like issues and like people and experiences and trying to understand and unravel those things. And before I actually enrolled in seminary, I had spent a year in Romania helping to plant a church. And as hard as it was for me during that time, I felt like there was really something in this realm of like finding new ways to do church. And like I was just really, really attracted to that. But like for me, how I kind of define church planting is more along the lines of like creating new spaces for people to experience Christ and his presence and his healing in a way that honors the context and the culture and the language that like this place is found in. And so like going into seminary, I was still like really unclear, like what is this new kind of thing that I feel in my heart emerging? Like what does that actually look like? What is that going to look like? So seminary for me was taking time to really explore what's at the heart of what I feel God is leading me towards, discovering the gifts that he's giving me and like discovering how to actually use those gifts out in the world. So yeah, like I don't have time to go into like every single step of my journey. But I do remember I wrote this paper for Ben Connor's class, the practices class, and I came across this book titled Mobilizing Hope, Faith-Inspired Activism for a Post-Civil Rights Generation. Like it's a pretty like intense title. But like there's this quote that said, charity is giving a man or a woman a fish to eat for a day. Justice is not only teaching them how to fish, but also working to ensure that they can own the pond and that the pond doesn't become polluted by outside forces. And like that quote kind of just like blew up in my mind. And it like really set me on this catalyst of all these different questions that were firing off in my my mind and my heart. Like, in what ways does our church actually address justice? Like not just charity, but like actual justice. Like is the church doing the work of meeting the needs of the people today, but also like in the ways that they can, helping to untangle these systemic issues that keep the people that we say we're serving in the name of Christ oppressed? Like what are the hidden structures in our worship and our music and in our preaching and in our leadership and our art and our architecture and like all these things? Like what are they doing to work against us instead of for us? Like what systems in the world, but also like the church help to keep Indigenous people and Black people oppressed? And like as an artist, I'm also an illustrator, like how is art and creativity underutilized in the church and how can it speak to like systemic issues?
Yes.
Yeah, like those are like easily like lifelong questions for me. But it's actually those questions that I wrestled with that led me to doing an independent study on theological aesthetics and Christian community development during my senior year. And that ultimately like led me to volunteer at a Christian community development organization in Detroit, which led me to the job that I'm in right now. So it's kind of just like this, so it doesn't seem linear at the time, but it was kind of just like boom, 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 here I am. So like, yeah, like I'm not in the pulpit every Sunday morning. I'm not like necessarily on the front lines doing like counseling or like food distribution or like youth ministry. But like I'm on the streets, I'm listening to the people, I'm hearing their needs, I'm hearing their pain, I'm hearing their fears. I'm taking these stories back to these leaders in government, these policymakers, and working with them to try and help like redesign these systems that have been working against the people that they say they're serving. And like it's slow, it's arduous, like it's not very sexy at times, but like I love the work I'm doing. I feel like I'm honoring Christ in some way, bringing justice into these broken systems. And like at the same time, I'm in the back of my mind wondering like how can I marry these techniques and these things that I'm learning as a design researcher with the church and like start untangling these systemic issues within the church that have caused more harm than good, in a way that can like help people like, you know, live out their faith and flourish as the body of Christ. So okay, that's all stop.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Thank you. Jenn, you started seminary as a second career person and worked your way through seminary as you were raising a family, as you were working and juggling some of the things that some of our students are wondering how they might be able to do it all in that regard. How did your experience at Western affect the way that you found yourself thinking theologically after having been involved in church and church structures for a number of years, and then thinking through what you were learning within your seminary experience and how that worked toward what it is that you do now? And what are some of the things that you've done in the last little bit of time? And what is it about campus ministry that you're enjoying and at this point?
That's a big question.
I know, I'm sorry.
There's a lot of questions there.
I had it really sunctly worded.
Yeah, no, I know that's great, but then I can just talk about whatever I want to talk about.
There you go.
Let me see. I'll pick up on the other two speakers, and thank you so much. Yeah, let's see. I often describe that I came to seminary as a result of a midlife crisis. I wasn't quite midlife, but kind of in my late 30s, really had a strong sense of call, mostly that I didn't want to be doing what I had been doing for quite a while. I was a teacher, and I was working in a wonderful school, working with wonderful people, but I was not in the classroom anymore, and just really had a sense of something else. And what I'd always wanted to do, always, was to attend seminary. And I really feel like God called me to himself in some ways by means of seminary. So unlike Luis, who I got to sit beside in class, I love school. I love. I'm never happier than like sitting in the classroom and writing paper and reading books. So I was delighted to take a break from the working world and to immerse myself in theology and scriptural studies. And all the things that I got to do in seminary. And it took me 4 years to get through. And I just honestly say I loved every minute of it. It was just, in many ways, such a grace to me to be able to be a part of the Western community and to get to work with and learn from and be a part of just wonderful thinking and learning and such a great and a worshiping. I think it's just been one of the most wonderful worshiping communities that I've gotten to be a part of. So I'm so grateful. Yeah, it was not easy, I don't think. I do have a husband and children and things like that. So, but you make it work, and everyone was super supportive. And thinking vocationally and sort of to my call into ministry, I did not enter seminary with any sort of sense of really strong call to like preaching or pastoral ministry or church planting or anything like that. I remember a good friend of mine went into seminary knowing that she wanted to be a chaplain, a hospice chaplain. And she's, graduated, we graduated at the same time, and that's what she's doing, and she's thriving. I had no sense of that. And so as I was in seminary, then I think I kind of developed a sense of a pastoral call of really a profound sort of, I just think of it as a grace that if I got to be a pastor, if I got to love God and love God's people in some way, shape, or form, that felt like the most worthy identity I could possibly experience. And so I felt in a sense of being called to be a pastor, but I wasn't sure where. And I remember hearing about church planters like Luis and so many other, church planting rock stars, and saying, oh, I would never, that is not me. So not me, I would never be a church planter. And then my first job out of seminary was as a pastor of a church plant. And I just found it really humorous in some ways that God would call me to a 5-year-old church plant, which at that point was a small congregation. But I'm so grateful for that call. I was there for almost 3 years as a solo pastor, and it was a bivocational situation. I was part-time as well. But then sort of as I was wondering about some options, I was approached by campus ministries and by my boss at Hope College, which ironically, the position that I now serve, I had applied for like 4 years previous, and wasn't given an interview, and then 4 years later got to sort of reapply for that job, and that's what I currently get to do. So currently I'm the chaplain of discipleship at Hope College, and that is just a profound joy. I love working with college students. I love, usually I say that I just get to walk with college students on the path of Christ, wherever they are on that path. College is just, college is such a tremendous, amazing journey. So whether students know Christ at all, have grown up in the church or never been to the church, or anyway, I just love to walk with them on the path of Christ and point them to Christ. And I was well equipped with my seminary in that college students ask really hard questions. And usually they're really hard, deep theological questions. And so I have to like sharpen my tools all the time of how do I explain big questions and little questions to them in a way that is, worthy of Christ and that points to Christ. So I'm always using my seminary stuff.
Good, thank you. I've heard a couple of you talk about bivocational, which I think in some circles is a really common thing, and other circles, as it comes to ministry, isn't an incredibly common thing. Was that something that you sort of thought about as just occurring naturally for you in your work with ministry? And any one of you can jump in. Keith,
well,
if you have questions about that too.
If I could answer that, I just, yeah. So after after seminary, I had, and again, I'm very calling oriented. I had received the job offer after seminary that paid extremely, extremely well. You know, right after seminary, I had a job offer that paid close to $95,000 a year. I turned that down to be bivocational to start a church in Lansing. That wasn't fun to turn that down, but at the end of the day, I felt that that's what God was calling me to do. So, you know, when it comes to the bivocation, my degree at Western kind of helped me too, to be able to start this hospice chaplaincy, you know, to supplement me and to supplement my income to be able to plant the church as well. And what's been really cool about the whole thing is that the church and the chaplaincy have kind of like mixed together. And, you know, a lot of the families that I've been able to, you know, walk alongside their loved ones during their death have actually resulted into coming to the church, you know. So it's been really cool. And our church is not very traditional in the sense of, you know, our focus is not Sunday morning. Our focus is more, you know, the group setting. So I mean, we still meet, but it's our emphasis is in discipleship in the group setting, and we're very focused on social justice too in our in the capital city. So anyway, for me, you know, it was bivocational by choice, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, it was just the way that God was able to, you know, open the doors that way.
Yeah, I can add on to that a little bit. When I've seen like pastors who have done like recent church plantings or are focused on like community development kind of churches, a lot of them are bivocational and they don't see it as a hindrance. They see it as actually like an addition to their ministry. And they're interacting with more people than they would if they were kind of just in one role. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was bivocational for a little while. This was a few years before I came to Western. And as Kristen and Luis both said, I loved it. I mean, it's risky. It could be unnerving at times, especially as someone who at the time was married and still am and had 6 kids. They're older now, but they were younger then. They just went from eating Gerber to now hamburgers and fries. And so, but it was really life-giving. I like to say that the bivocational role, probably more than any role that I had in relation to the church, allowed me to maintain prophetic leverage, meaning I was on Monday through Friday, I was working at a charter school as like an associate dean and doing some teaching. And then, you know, twice a month, I would have these board meetings. And sometimes in the meetings at the church, we were preoccupied with how are we going to survive? And what is it that we need to do to ensure institutional success and viability? But Monday through Friday, I'm working with a population of students, some of whom have had an uncle get arrested, a father get shot, or, you know, going home to homes where there is no food. And it just really, it does something to you personally, but then in terms of your leadership, it does help to keep the church faithful to its primary call. And
yeah,
I actually loved it. So
I would echo that, Keith. You know, the wonderful thing about being bivocational is that it's not strenuous to the church budget. Really, that's been one of the biggest blessings, because if you look at most churches and their line item, the biggest line item that they have is payroll. You know, and so it frees so much resources for actual community engagement. You know, when you're not being paid all this money, you get what I'm saying, this full-time money, you're able to actually, you know, be able to focus on the actual things that you want to focus, you know.
Thank you. I think that in the time that we're entering, bivocational ministry probably is going to become more and more of a way for churches to be able to survive and ministries to be able to survive. So hearing more about that, I think, is really helpful, particularly for prospective students who are just beginning to think about this. Now, I'd like to hear from Dr. Connor and Dr. Small and Shari about what are some of the ways that listening to our alumni have sort of made you think about what it is that Western has to offer and how we can serve students who are maybe interested in similar types of things or aren't quite sure or feel the need for some sort of bivocational ministry work? And I'll just let you pop in.
I think I'm the first to unmute, so I'll just jump in. Thanks everybody for sharing your stories. I think that what you're saying is really resonant with what we hear from prospective students all the time, that more and more of them either have kind of a wider idea about what God might be calling them to do, but that needs to be clarified throughout their experience at seminary. So one of the things that I get really excited about at Western is that we have a lot of flexibility in terms of the kinds of ministries that we want you to experience while you're here and encourage you to experience. So one of the ways I think we do this really well is that we have tons of flexibility in terms of encouraging you to explore different kinds of ministry while you're here. So in the Formation for Ministry office, that often looks like internships, but it's also just networking in the community to get you connected to people and places where you can learn more about what ministry might look like that isn't centered around a church building, but might be more out in the community or in a hospital or something else.
We also have classes that push you out that way. I'm thinking of Suzanne McDonald's Creation Care class. And we have a whole prison ministry education partnership with Hope College that you can get involved in. And we have a disability program, the only one like it in the US, where we offer electives that push you into areas that don't typically make it into a seminary curriculum and intersect with all sorts of other services. But another thing that's along with that, with all the talk of bivocation, that's not going to happen unless you have a sense of vocation where the people in your church understand that they're ordained at their baptism and they're given gifts to minister. So in support of a bivocational identity, there is an understanding of what vocation is that I think will set you up to have the kind of congregation that will support you in that kind of ministry, where they see everybody in the congregation as a minister with spirit-given gifts that you are helping them to employ for the good of the kingdom and for their own joy.
I'll pick up on that. I actually have an M.Div from a school in Chicago. I was a pastor for 14 years before I came to the seminary. Actually, right now, you may have seen them walk by. I'm church planning. There's about 14 children in my backyard, and every time they run by, I yell, "Lord, have mercy." So that's one ministry, is just the ministry of parenting other people's kids. But I think in terms of my M.Div, it's been interesting. I've been a coach for folks. I've done financial literacy training for folks. There's a lot of opportunities in terms of leading the church in mission, which is our mission statement. But the church can't just be the local congregation. It's got to be something bigger. Anything that is leading in the name of Jesus, that serves, heals, and empowers other folks. And those opportunities are limitless. I'll give you one really interesting example. Just about an hour ago, I sent the job description to about 15 or 20 former students at Western who understand financial literacy, philanthropy, and generosity. And I said, if you want to get involved with a financial services organization, this group is looking for someone with an M.Div or an MA from a seminary, someone who gets Jesus, who knows how to lead, but understands finances. 20 years ago, that was never an option for someone with a seminary degree. So whether, like Kristen said, with community development, financial services, social work, I think about the movement of that's called defund the police. No matter how you feel about that, there's going to be a movement for more folks who understand the human services industry. And when you love and follow Jesus Christ, human services is kind of at the forefront of our minds. So I think that the M.Div, the MA from a seminary is a pretty creative place for you to take previous skills, previous knowledge bases, build some more, and to serve the world in the name of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I think that I was involved in marketing in the business world before I started at the seminary and before I started taking classes at the seminary. And ministry and marketing are really compatible because you see a need and you see what is necessary to fill the need and you put it together. And so being able to develop a theology for having those conversations and being able to do that well and faithfully, even for someone who is just curious about how their faith can inform the way that they do the work that they do in the marketplace or outside of church settings, because the world needs that as much too. Keith, do you have, in what ways, in all the things that you've done, your seminary experience, you have a MBA, Master's in Business Administration. How do those all tie together, and how did seminary inform that?
Yes, so I have in any role that I've had in the local church or outside of the local church, I've always had somewhat of an entrepreneurial instinct, wanting to build things, build movements, build initiatives. And I just realized in my own educational experience that I had not intuitively understood business and entrepreneurship, but I really wanted to take a deep dive into how best to do that for sustainability and all of that. And so I went back to school to get my MBA to help me think through systems management, project management, budgeting on all levels, marketing as well. And it was working another side of my brain, but I found my seminary education to be compatible with it in the classroom, and then definitely in the field, to be able to think about an environment, a context where some kingdom activity could emerge, and to study that, consider that, and then eventually start, a nonprofit in Indiana and doing some nonprofit stuff here in Holland now, and thinking through all the logistics and the marketing and the branding and all of that, but doing so in a way that makes Christ prominent and not just rely upon business acumen, in my case. And so I've seen the compatibility of both of those programs, but ultimately they converge in me and inspire and inform the way in which I lead.
You just muted yourself, Keith.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. So it's been really, really incredible for me. And now working in admissions, I think early on in my ministry career, I had an allergic reaction to data and metrics and stuff. But, seminary, MBA has helped me to realize how data, not only data driven or slave to data, but certainly recognizing the data and using it to make you smarter in the way in which you labor. And I think sometimes numbers are stubborn things. And as pastors, we are hopeful. We, in most cases, hopeful and optimistic. And sometimes looking at numbers and data can be discouraging. And so I've just allowed it to be an encounter with the truth for me. And so both have been incredible for me and have helped me to be effective in my call.
Thank you. We have a question from one of our participants, wondering if students who have graduated from seminary feel like having a Master of Divinity and or theology has opened more doors for them compared to whether or not if they hadn't had the degree. It seems like this individual thinks, it seems like that you had opportunities you might not have had otherwise. So I'd love to hear from any one of you, our alumni for sure. What is your feeling about that?
I believe so. I believe that it has opened quite a few doors for me, in both, in the hospice job, hospice chaplaincy, actually, I get paid more than the other chaplains just because I have a master's degree. So, you know, and I'm enrolled at the doctorate of ministry program at Western. So that helped my financial situation quite a bit when it came to that. And also, you know, at Western, I was able to I'm a networker, so that comes pretty natural to me, but it gave me the opportunities to network. I think that was just another blessing, you know, in Kristen, like Kristen said, you know, that the reason she has the job that she has now was because of networks that she built throughout her time. So, so I think that's just it. You know, Western has a great opportunity to be able to have those networks in the church, in the RCA, or beyond, because I'm Wesleyan. But even beyond the denomination, there's just plenty of networking opportunities that are provided, and it's, you know, it definitely has helped to have a master's degree for sure. So.
Thank you, Louise.
I would say for me, I can lift up two areas where I think it has helped. Definitely like in the area of like research, like you have to write a lot of papers, you have to write sermons, you have to know how to look for sources and double check the sources and like really clarify your thoughts and synthesize. Like that's a huge like learning experience during your time in any master's program. And I would say especially in seminary. So taking that into my current job, my interview process actually looked like submitting 2 papers from seminary to them so that they could read and make sure like I knew how to write and research. So that was super helpful for the homework. A second one is the skills that I learned in listening, especially like taking the counseling courses, like learning about nonviolent communication. Having to like understand people, because a lot of what I do at my job is interviewing people, and I have to have really honed skills in listening. And listening is just such an important process for like your relationships. Also like understanding the people that you'll be serving, like sermon writing, like so much of like, yeah, your spiritual development is even part of listening. So like, I know I wouldn't have had that experience if it wasn't for my time in seminary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can just add that I think it definitely, yeah, having an M.Div was the path I really wanted to go on. And I work at Hope College. We're blessed to have a number of chaplains at Hope. And there are some of us that have M.Divs and some that do not. And so I think chaplaincy can be served by both folks. Others that I get to work with have a master's like in counseling, which, I mean, boy, do I lean on them when like I'm presented with a counseling situation that is way out of my depth. And I love being able to work with trained counselors. And for me, I also felt a strong enough commitment to the church to want to serve the church as an ordained pastor. And so I'm ordained within the RCA. And so I get to have the Reverend, you know, in front of my name, which definitely, you know, it allows me to serve the table. It allows me to serve at the table. It allows me to preach and pray. And I'm aware that that's allowed me to be invited into spaces that I may not have been in within the Hope College context, apart from kind of that degree and that ordination. So it served me well, and but I also feel it as a strong calling too. So
thank you. Kyle and Shari, you've worked with a lot of students as they seek placement and think about what's next and work and looking at what it is that they might be able to do. What are some of the ways that you've been able to really identify that a Master of Arts or a Master of Divinity or a certificate or some other, the completion of another program has helped them in their search for the call that God might have for them? And Ben, you can pipe in too, because you've worked with a lot of students over the years as well, in many ways.
Shari, do you want to go first? You want me to go?
Why don't you go first, because there's a separate question in the chat box and I can go from one to the next.
Okay. I mean, I'll say this. I think that degrees still have legitimacy in our culture and society. Degrees still grant some level of access. We could debate that another time, but just getting a degree gives you some level of access. Secondly, I think taking the time to do a degree creates new pathways in the brain for critical thinking, for imagination, for a vision of tomorrow. Just the space of study allows one to open up the mind to possibilities that weren't before considered. In terms of our office, the Formation for Ministry office at Western, we spend a lot of time just sitting and talking and dreaming with students. And so I think the big thing for me is it's not prescriptive, but it's practiced through discussions, through hearing one another, through imagining networks that maybe Western has or Western needs to get. And so your questions become the groundwork for our conversations, rather than our questions, our degrees, our programs prescribing to you what you should or should not do. I love to say that Western conversationally is a capacious place that we can dream a dream with you that gives you a chance to use your gifts in a particular place that God's called you. That isn't as clear and detailed as I might like to be, but my hope is what you hear, and that is we long to sit with you in your questions and imagine some possibility for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I would echo in that is we encourage you to experience things, and then we kind of go on that journey with you about what are you learning from what you've experienced in terms of your next steps. So because we're a small school, I think we have the luxury of that being a pretty high touch thing. You'll find that faculty want to connect with you and talk about what you're experiencing in ministry. They want to ask questions about what that means for you in terms of your sense of call. But I think one of the things that I've learned both through getting an M.Div myself and journeying with lots of other people into their call to ministry is that if you're on this call, you're already called to ministry. If you're a person of Christian faith, you're already called to ministry. The particular questions that emerge around seminary are about how you are going to be faithful in that call, what specific things God might be calling you to do next, whether that's ordination or getting a degree because that credentials you to do something you couldn't before. So I think you're already called. It's just a question of how do you live into that call and what are the particularities of that. If you don't graduate from seminary and get the job you dreamed you would get, that doesn't mean you're not called to be a faithful Christian minister in some capacity. It just means it might not have the shape that you thought it would. So someone had put in the Q&A box a question about my journey from corporate finance into serving God's kingdom. And I would say my journey in finance actually, I think, taught me how to live into my Christian calling. I don't think of it as a separate, I was called away from finance as a profession, but it was a really interesting season. I went straight into finance from my M.Div. I had one colleague who used to try to sell me as a better banker because I had a master's degree from Princeton. And then I would sit down and they would say, oh, so what was it like to study finance? And I lost my credibility immediately because I was like, oh, I didn't study finance there. I studied theology. But I can also help you with your finances if you'd like. But it was interesting. I had been in finance just kind of accidentally as a bank teller and then as a personal banker. And then after seminary, I didn't have a clear sense of what I was going to do. And so I ended up, because I needed health insurance and I had a young family, taking a job. I ended up at JP Morgan Chase and I did banking there. And then I did mortgages. And I kind of ended up in theological education almost by accident, I would say, by the circumstances of our family and some of the folks that we knew. But I don't know that the call to follow Jesus or to serve the church has changed that much. It was challenging in a particular way when I was in finance. But I don't know that call wholesale changed in or outside of the financial world in the same way that it doesn't change a whole lot inside or outside of theological education.
There's a question here from one of our guests. It says, for the person who has the MTS, and I'm guessing that's you, Keith, right? Is that the, no?
Mm-mm.
Did someone else talk about that?
MTS? Mm-mm.
And Master's in Theological Studies, I'm guessing. So I guess, and this would probably apply to our MA, what are the benefits to getting or to completing the Master of Arts program and serving in a non-church position? Does anybody have any insight into that? And then what is that compared to the M.Div? So I completed a Master of Arts degree, which has been incredibly helpful in the work that I do with students who are thinking about ministry in some context or another, being able to think with them biblically and theologically, being able to, as Kristen mentioned, listen well and to hear what's below the actual conversation that's going on. Those are things that I learned to do distinctly at Western in seminary. The Master of Divinity degree, as Jenn mentioned, is a credential that allows you to move into certain circles within a denomination that are difficult to access without the credential. So the difference is also the number of credits and the types of things that you learn, but it depending on what circles you're traveling in, it can also mean what types of professional opportunities are available to you. Anybody have anything more to say about that?
There's a lot of creativity in the church today, specifically with millennials and Gen Zs. There's a lot of creativity when it comes to church. I know several people who have planted churches in the marketplace, who have really built groups in their workplaces. And obviously it's kind of, you're teeter-tottering some ethics there, you know what I'm saying, like when it comes to that. But at the end of the day, like, there is some creative ways of doing church nowadays that is not in the traditional setting, that is not in a pulpit with pews. So when it comes to that, like, for example, my wife doesn't have a master's degree. Maybe Keith, maybe you'll be able to recruit her, but I don't know. But she doesn't have a master's degree, but she's got me. So, and we have a lot of theological discussions and a lot of, we form each other. And my wife is a banker for Huntington Bank. And let me tell you, some amazing ministry opportunities have happened where she's at. One of the things is she was actually, she was approached by her district manager. And she said, they said to her, "Hey, Maria, we need you to be at this branch who's dying, and we think we're going to close it because it's not making money." And the district manager said, "I know that you and your husband are pastors at a church. If you guys can't turn it around, I don't know who can." So Maria was like, "Okay, I accept the challenge," and she went into that branch, and by the grace of God, she was able to turn it around. She was completely able to turn it around. It was number one in the district of income revenue. And they were just like, it was just an amazing witness. And I'm not trying to preach prosperity gospel here, but I'm just saying that it was just an amazing witness that they would say, you know what, Maria and Luis, because they know both of us, Maria and Luis have experience with people and customer service, right? And they're really well trained in their profession. Let's give it a shot. It provided an opportunity for Maria, just because we were pastors, right? So I'm just saying that there's a lot of creative ways of doing church nowadays. That's not just the traditional way.
Yeah, I can add on to that. In the church that I helped plant in Romania, it started out as in someone's like living room, and it eventually emerged into a like cafe front store. Like, they have their services in the cafe. They operate as a cafe, as a business, selling coffee and different food items and stuff, unapologetically saying we are a Christian-owned business. And there's a lot of those actually models like around Europe. And like, I haven't seen too many of those in the United States. And like, I really just wonder if we're just limiting ourselves by our imagination and not allowing ourselves to dream bigger and to reimagine what the church could look like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Say one last thing. I was just talking to a new neighbor that was walking by, and he said, "Are you on a conference call?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you do?" I said, "I teach at a seminary." And he said, "What do you teach?" I said, "Pastoral and church leadership." He goes, "Me too. I just call it entrepreneurship. It's at the University of Chicago Booth School." And I thought, if that's not a kind of a combination that we're all trying to do certain things, we do it in the name of Christ, and we're unwilling to give up the sense that we lead with God through service and humility. So that was a fun kind of intersection.
Thank you. Ben, you haven't had a chance to say too much, so I want to see if you'd like to leave us with a word about
I like not saying too much.
I know.
A word about what?
Well, just maybe your experience and how you see a seminary experience connecting with disability and ministry and the work that you're passionate about.
I mean, one thing it does is the way that we view humans is dominated by media portrayals and social sciences. So we're collections of features and systems that work, and we're not understood necessarily as living in a creation, but just living on an earth or in a world. And so one thing theological studies does is give you a completely different view of what people are. And so if people are created in the image of God, and everyone is created in the image of God, and we're all given certain gifts and capacities and abilities, and we're not complete without each other. I mean, it challenges a lot of what our world tells us a person is and what a person is for, and challenges myths of success, myths of independence, the idea that it's even possible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, as if that's the thing that you'd want to do. So there's so many things just about what it is to be a human that you learn through theological education, that's going to help you in anything that you do to understand people better, to understand yourself better.
Thank you. And I would say that at a place like Western, that's probably at the heart, hopefully, of just about every class that you're going to take. At least it was for the courses that I know that I took. They were all really formational in thinking along those lines. Kyle, thanks for bringing up the point that these things are available to students who are studying on campus or by distance learning, that the engagement is high touch and it's there for you no matter what format you use to study and to learn. And I think that's one of the beautiful distinctives about what happens at Western as well. And it's because you are being connected with the types of people who are on this screen in front of you, and they care deeply about the human experience and how it connects with our theology and who is God and what is it that we're called to do in this world for the benefit of the world and through what we know about the love of God. So it is 4 o'clock. And I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our guest panelists. Thank you to our faculty and staff. Thank you to the people who stayed and listened to us talk about the thing that we love. And if you have more questions and you'd like to learn more, just email any one of us at Western. The email system is really easy. It's firstname.lastname@westernsem.edu. And any one of us will be happy to answer a question that might remain after this. This was recorded, so it will be available, and we'll look forward to sharing that with you as well. Anyone want to say a final word? Okay. Thank you all. Have a great day. Thanks so much, Gus, for joining us.
Thanks, Jill and Keith, for pulling this together.